So, did you guys see Divergent this week? I did.
Your results were inconclusive.
This was supposed to tell me what to do. We're supposed to trust the test.
Didn't work on you.
So the basic thrust of Divergent is a dystopian society in which if you can walk and chew gum at the same time, you are a threat to the system and must be destroyed. And if you feel like Divergent feels pretty safe and samey and really deeply derivative, it's, because it is. But since it did pretty well, I think we can now safely assume that YA adaptations are not going to die off when the Hunger Games ends. So I've been meaning to do this for a while. I want to chat a little bit about the young adult adaptations that came out last year, and maybe speculate a little bit on where this is going.
I don't want to be just one thing. I want to be brave and selfless and intelligent and honest and kind.
So what are considered the YA adaptations of 2013? Well, here is our basic list. We have The Host, Beautiful Creatures, Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters, Ender's Game, The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, Warm Bodies, The Book Thief, The Mortal Instruments, City of Boners, and The Spectacular Now. Yeah, I didn't see that one either. Now let's generalize! I'd say that besides having protagonists between the ages of 15 and 19, there's not much in the way of unifying threads here. Some were financially successful, some were disappointments, and you've got a couple disasters in there. Most are science fiction or fantasy, but we've also got one contemporary and another historical fiction. Some were executed with great passion on the part of the filmmakers, some were the most phoned-in phone that phone never phone, and some were made by people who have no idea what they are doing and have no business making big-budget movies in the first place. And some...
What? No, not in here!
Not in here?
I have no idea how this got a sequel. Some were pleasant surprises, some were disappointments, and some were terrible and surprised no one because the book it was based on was terrible. Seriously guys, could you not do better with that set design? Like, what interesting plaster smears this stucco cave has. Sorry, the host. But anyway, all of these movies fall under a big, important umbrella that didn't really exist in the pre-Twilight days and is a thing now. I mean, think about it. These are our teen movies now. Teen movies with a massive budget that live and die on whether adults watch them too. This sort of thing has basically replaced this sort of thing. For better or worse. But the big difference here is where in the 90s it was okay if only teenage girls saw a thing. Now they pretty much live and die on whether a general audience sees them as well. Because tentpoles. But I first want to quantify some of these suckers, and this term young adult, which I'm honestly not too fond of. Are all of these so-called YA adaptations actually YA adaptations? Well, for 3 of them, the answer is no, not really. Ender's Game is 30 years old, and while beloved by adolescent boys, wasn't reshelved from adult sci-fi into young adult section until pretty recently. Similarly, The Host, which features a protagonist in her 20s, was originally an adult sci-fi book, and upon publication was even marketed as sci-fi for people who don't like sci-fi. Believe me, I know it was there and it's pissed me off. And the author of Warm Bodies fought, albeit unsuccessfully, to keep his book out of the YA section. He, like me, was not a huge fan of this demographic ghetto of sorts, although it certainly exists for a reason, but that's a subject for another day. Point is, I'm not saying that these 3 books don't really belong here. The term young adult has almost nothing to do with content and everything to do with primary demographic. Hence these books getting recategorized. It's a question of who is reading them. The point is that this idea of young adult is a nebulous one, and trying to tie it up into a neatly identifiable package so that you can either dismiss it or vaunt it is kind of disingenuous. As a genre, which it isn't, it's very, very broad. The only unifying theme here is the age of the protagonists. Except for The Host. And I'm sorry, but can we talk about the sets in this monstrosity? This is supposed to take place inside a cave, like in the Southwest? Are you kidding me? It looks like someone's downstairs rec room. Like, this is the place where you stand in line for Pirates of the Caribbean. Sorry, there's just so much about that whole endeavor to... Hey, sorry, gonna talk about the, thing. Thing. Why does this matter? Remember when we had, adaptations of Harry Potter and the Narnia books, and, those have been around for a while. The fact that young adult adaptations are a thing now has almost everything to do with Twilight and the very big audience of young women that remains largely ignored by Hollywood. And you know what? Almost the only science fiction movies with female protagonists we see these days are young adult adaptation. Keyword here is almost. There hasn't really been a trend that allows young women to be the primary audience of an honest-to-God cultural zeitgeist on the level of something as huge as Twilight or The Hunger Games or you.
They call it Divergent.
But people are kind of treating this like it's a trend, and that may well be, but it's been 6 years since Twilight came out, and this trend only seems to be gaining steam. A fact lamented by many in part because these movies tend to be bad, but there is an underlying discomfort at the idea of something as huge as, say, The Hunger Games, the highest grossing movie of 2013, was originally a book primarily for teenage girls. For there is no lower form of life than the teenage girl, and we must loathe them dutifully. In the relatively lower profile world of publishing criticism, barely a week goes by without some pearl-clutching think piece about how young adult books are bad, or mean the death of literature, or we're denouncing pop art because, I don't know, dystopia is inane, or teenage girls are stupid, or romance is bad, or it's taking attention away from, the Bret Easton Ellises or the Jonathan Franzens of the world or something. And I find that in the world of movie criticism, the same kind of holds true, because most of them are quite bad, yes, but we'd be lying to ourselves if we didn't admit that this is because the books that they are based on are also quite bad. Most of them. Although I was pleasantly surprised by Warm Bodies. It was a cute little zombie movie, and I genuinely miss movies that are little, more little movies that aren't tit poles. So what do we have in store for 2014? Well, the curse of bombing while being not very good has already been broken by Divergent, which did pretty well, and one of the biggest releases of the summer is going to be a heartwarming contemporary story about kids with cancer that was based on a very successful book, so I think that one's probably safe. And as for the Hunger Games knockoffs, looks like we're inviting the boys to play this year. We will have both The Maze Runner and The Giver, which... woof. If I didn't know this was a real thing, I would assume it's like a Funny or Die parody. We'll talk about that one another day.
When people have the freedom to choose, they choose wrong.
Trusted you, Jeff Bridges. What we are likely to see more of is really, really samey stuff, especially in the wake of Divergent, which is the real shame because there are some good YA books out there which might more readily lend themselves to adaptation. Instead, we have The Giver and The Maze Runner, which looks to be pitching themselves as Hunger Games for boys, which, for the time being, look very, very similar to this thing.
Divergence threaten the system.
But if 2013 is anything to go by, we're probably going to have most of them range from disappointing to just awful. A couple that are decent, and one Hunger Games movie that will be awesome and way better than the book was. Because Catching Fire was awesome and I will hear no other. But that, like Twilight, leads to cheap knockoffs, and that does no favors for anyone. Hollywood, but hey, you're Hollywood. It's how you roll. The sad thing, really, is the nail in the coffin will be too much similar crap. Hunger Games made a buttload of money when it came out because it felt new, at least in the movie world, but now there's a half a dozen Hunger Gameses, and with the exception of maybe the possible glimmer of hope for The Fault in Our Stars, the trailer did not leave me feeling optimistic, but it's just a trailer, they lie sometimes. The type of movie that gets adapted seems to be converging narrower and narrower to the point of probable collapse. So while I did not like Divergent, I can hope that Hollywood will wise up and scoot their movies towards things that at least feel fresh, or this will indeed just be a trend, and we will look back on it and be like, wow, was that actually supposed to be an actual cave? It looks like Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's farm, or maybe they're about to go into the land of the lost or something. Oh no, I know what this is. It's a day spa in Las Vegas called Awakenings. I haven't even scratched the surface on the host.